They thought no one was watching. A silent convoy crawled through the dunes of Agadez, no license plates, no headlights, no national flags. But in the shadows, villagers were watching, quietly, carefully. And when the sun rose, a man was pulled from his vehicle in handcuffs. His face was stone, but the security officers knew exactly who he was. This wasn't just any insurgent. This was Barhadine Mehdoune, a former Libyan army officer turned war broker. For more than a decade, he had been the silent architect behind smuggling routes, armed rebellions, and terror networks stretching from Tripoli to Timbuktu. A ghost figure moving between Dubai, Istanbul, and Niger, masked behind fake identities and humanitarian missions. But this arrest? This was not just a military victory. This was a declaration of war by the AES alliance Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, against an invisible system, one propped up by foreign governments, private contractors, and shadowy diplomatic deals that have bled Africa dry while smiling through press conferences. Something has changed. Africa is no longer whispering. It is waking up and speaking in the voice of action. And in the center of this awakening stands one name, President Ibrahim Traoré. Young, uncompromising. He doesn't wait for permission from the West. He doesn't plead for aid. He uncovers the enemy in daylight and dares to call it by name. Can we continue to trust President Ibrahim Traoré, or should we support someone else to succeed him? Please share if you feel that you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. It happened at dawn near the outer dunes of Agadez, a city long known not just for its salt trade and caravans, but also for its uneasy silence. For decades, Agadez had been the quiet crossroad of smugglers, mercenaries, and shadow operations. But this time, the silence was broken not by gunfire, but by strategy. A high-level surveillance team from Niger's new anti-terror intelligence unit had been tracking a suspicious movement for days. They received anonymous reports from nomadic traders, unusual vehicles, foreign-accented voices at a rural gas station, a strange man handing out medicine in a village where no one asked for it. It didn't take long to link these anomalies to a name that had long vanished from intelligence briefings: Barhadine Mayown. Mayown wasn't just a former soldier. He was a survivor of chaos, a man who once saluted under Gaddafi's command and who disappeared after NATO's bombardment shattered Libya in 2011. Since then, he had reportedly resurfaced under various aliases, most notably as Abu Bakr Bouberbella, a supposed humanitarian coordinator with ties to NGOs operating in Mali and Niger. But behind the masks was a career forged in blood. Mayown was known for his mastery of desert logistics, moving arms and fighters across thousands of miles with near-invisible footprints. He coordinated safe houses, laundering routes, and shell companies. In Tripoli, he wore a suit. In Timbuktu, a turban. In Dubai, he was a businessman. But to the people of Sahel, he was the ghost that funded violence and vanished before the fires died down. On that morning, however, there was no escape. As his convoy approached the outskirts of Agadez under the guise of food delivery, Niger's security forces executed a flawless blockade. No gunfire was needed, only silence and steel resolve. Within minutes, Mayown and 5 associates were in custody. What they found in his possession shocked even the most seasoned officers: encrypted satellite devices, large sums of unmarked cash, a flash drive containing geographic data of training camps in southern Libya, and a handwritten ledger listing contacts in Istanbul, Dubai, and surprisingly, London. The arrest shook more than just the local security landscape. It sparked a revelation. This wasn't just a field op gone right. It was a crack in the mirror, revealing how deeply interconnected terrorism, private funding, foreign influence, and destabilization efforts had become in the Sahel. For years, Western governments spoke of helping Africa with development security partnerships and anti-terror missions. But this arrest suggested something darker, that some elements had been feeding both sides of the war for profit, for control, and for strategic footholds. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso was one of the first to react, stating publicly, "We were told to trust global systems, but what we found are global shadows." This single arrest validated what leaders of the AES alliance had long suspected, but could never fully prove: that their enemies were not only in the forests, but also in boardrooms and embassies. In the following 48 hours, coordinated raids were launched in Mali and Burkina Faso using intelligence derived from Mayown's devices. One weapons cache was found buried beneath a fake school in Ouagadougou. Another was hidden inside a humanitarian aid truck in Gao. These were not random crimes, they were part of a supply chain of chaos. And perhaps most importantly, the people saw it unfold in real time. For the first time, it wasn't a Western newspaper or foreign diplomat defining the narrative. It was local journalists, AES command centers, and citizen reports documenting the truth. No filters, no spin. The arrest of Barhadine Mehdoune was not just about removing a man. It was about unmasking a system. And the world for once had to watch the truth come from the ground up. The moment the news broke Barhadine Mehdoune captured in Agadez, the ripple effect was instant and unmistakable. Within hours, cell phones lit up across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. On Telegram groups, radio stations, and neighborhood corners, people asked the same question. What was he really doing here? For the citizens of the Sahel, this was not just the arrest of a foreign agitator, it was vindication. A sense that their long-held suspicions about outside manipulation, shadow wars, and double-faced diplomacy were finally being confirmed in daylight. But the real climax came 24 hours later, when footage was leaked unverified but credible of Mayown during his interrogation. Sitting upright, expressionless, his voice was low but steady. He named locations. He described logistics. He referenced foreign passports, offshore accounts, and liaisons within humanitarian agencies. One name he dropped reportedly caused immediate panic inside a Western embassy in Bamako. This wasn't just explosive, it was politically radioactive. The government of Niger moved quickly to contain the wave. They increased security around detention sites, summoned international observers, and quietly prepared extradition files. Mali activated digital counterintelligence protocols. Burkina Faso called for an emergency intelligence summit between EAS members. But it wasn't just governments reacting. In Ouagadougou, protesters gathered in front of the French Cultural Center not to riot, but to demand answers. They carried signs reading, "Stop hiding behind peacekeeping," and "Africa deserves truth, not lectures." The atmosphere was tense yet focused. For the first time, ordinary citizens felt they were part of a continental shift where their voices mattered more than foreign press releases. President Ibrahim Traoré, flanked by his ministers, addressed the nation on public radio. When foreign hands design our conflicts and call it peace, we must expose them not with anger, but with clarity. Barhadine is not the problem. He is a symptom. That one line? "He is a symptom" became a slogan overnight. It spread across social media, printed on t-shirts, chalked on walls. It marked a turning point in how people framed the conflict not as a battle against individual warlords, but against a hidden ecosystem of destabilization. Meanwhile, international media hesitated. Most Western outlets offered vague headlines: "Alleged terror, financier apprehended in Niger," "Controversial ex-officer in custody, investigation ongoing." Few dared to mention Mayown's connection to Western-linked NGOs arms brokers or the post-Libya vacuum left by NATO's 2011 intervention. That silence was not lost on the people of Sahel. As one citizen journalist tweeted, "They wrote our headlines for 50 years. Now that we write our own, they call it propaganda." The tension reached global institutions too. Within days, an unnamed EU representative requested clarity on the legal handling of Mayown's detention, citing human rights concerns. The African Union issued a brief, neutral statement, but Traoré's office responded sharply, "We appreciate concern." But where were these concerns when foreign-backed arms flooded our villages? In contrast, the EAS alliance tightened their bonds. Instead of fracturing under diplomatic pressure, they launched joint intelligence operations to track remaining operatives connected to Mayown's network. At least 2 arrests were made in Mali the following week. In Burkina Faso, drone surveillance over the northern corridor tripled. Traoré met with Goïta and Chiani via secure conference to coordinate the next wave of internal cleansing. But perhaps the most symbolic moment came during a candlelight gathering in Niamey. Hundreds of citizens held up candles not just in memory of past victims, but in solidarity with the living who had survived the silent war of foreign interference. A 13-year-old girl recited a poem, "We are not pawns in other people's peace. We are not shadows on satellite screens. We are the heart that beats beneath the sand." No politician could have said it better. By now, it was clear the capture of Barhadine Mehdoune was not an endpoint. It was a trigger. It awakened a region tired of being managed, spoken for, and sacrificed. And it revealed something the world wasn't ready to admit, that the greatest threat to African sovereignty may not always carry a gun. Sometimes it carries a clipboard, a press badge, or a business card from London. The arrest of Barhadine Mehdoune didn't just spark investigations, it ignited a chain reaction that shook the civic and political foundations of the Sahel. In Niger, the public demanded transparency. Town hall meetings sprung up across Agadez and Niamey. Local elders, community radio hosts, teachers, people long silenced by fear now stood up and asked hard questions. How many more like him have passed through here? How deep does this network go, and who let them in? The government of President Abdurrahmane Chiani, while stern in military response, had no choice but to confront an uncomfortable truth. Years of outsourcing national security to external consultants had left blind spots, ones that Barhadine and his financiers exploited with surgical precision. Immediately, Niger announced the suspension of 6 previously approved civil aid contracts with foreign-backed NGOs operating in the north. Some of these contracts had been untouched for years, rubber-stamped without review. But under new scrutiny, they revealed layers of third-party subcontractors, opaque bank transfers, and dual-use equipment communications gear that could serve both humanitarian and insurgent purposes. In Burkina Faso, the fallout was even more structural. President Ibrahim Traoré, already known for taking bold action, accelerated a series of domestic reforms that had long been stuck in bureaucratic limbo. Within 2 weeks, he signed a national security decree dissolving 12 foreign-linked intermediary organizations and rerouting their operational responsibilities to local cooperatives, community defense committees, and neighborhood surveillance teams. For decades, rural villages had been passive recipients of foreign stability programs, many of which arrived with impressive brochures, but little real impact. Now they were being asked to become the first line of defense. And they accepted. In the town of Dori, for example, a former schoolteacher was appointed head of a newly formed People's Security Node, a localized body responsible for monitoring unfamiliar visitors, documenting supply movement, and reporting suspicions directly to S intelligence. "We know our land better than any satellite," he told a local station. "They used to call us peasants. Now they call us partners." This local empowerment spilled into the broader political discourse. Youth groups, traditionally sidelined during policy debates, began forming civic forums to discuss regional security, economic resilience, and digital surveillance. In Bamako, a university panel asked whether West Africa should form its own independent internet backbone to prevent foreign surveillance and information warfare. These were not fringe discussions anymore, they were national conversations. Internationally, the arrest also shifted diplomatic alignments. Several Western embassies quietly requested clarification meetings with AES governments, some under the guise of strengthening transparency. But many African leaders declined or delayed, stating plainly that internal house cleaning comes first. In a notable public statement, Malian President Assimi Goïta declared, "We've seen their budgets, we've heard their promises. What we haven't seen is peace. From now on, we invest first in ourselves." This statement, echoed in speeches across the AES zone, marked a turning point in political will. No longer were these governments content with being strategic partners in someone else's vision. They were crafting a new doctrine of sovereignty, not only military but civil, digital, financial, and ideological. Of course, such realignments come with risk. Some elite circles inside these countries, especially those who had benefited from foreign contracts, began to resist quietly. Rumors of internal sabotage, leaked documents, and passive-aggressive legal challenges surfaced. In Ouagadougou, one former parliamentarian called the new national reforms populist theater. But the streets told a different story. There, vendors, mothers, teachers, and even ex-combatants were building food banks, organizing street patrols, and handing out flyers titled, "Protect what is ours from within and without." One retired soldier summed it up best at a community rally. "We fought for independence once, but we forgot to defend it every day. This time, we won't forget." In many ways, the civil and political consequences of Mayown's arrest weren't orchestrated from above. They rose organically from below, from families tired of funerals, from youth tired of lectures, from elders tired of waiting. And for the first time in generations, an entire region seemed to be asking not what can others do for us, but what must we do for ourselves. In Washington, the capture of Barhadine Mehdoune did not make the front pages. No press conference, no urgent call to action. Just a low-profile cable marked "Eyes Only" circulated within a few desks at the State Department and AFRICOM. But behind closed doors, the questions were louder than the silence. How could a man with known militant ties pass through NGO checkpoints, diplomatic corridors, and military training zones without notice? How many of these ghost operators still function across the Sahel, weaving between Western-funded programs and private military interests? And perhaps most troubling, has the U.S. lost credibility in a region that once considered it a counterweight to European control? For decades, American policy in West Africa walked a careful line supporting anti-terrorism missions, providing humanitarian aid, and promoting democratic values. But to many Africans today, those efforts have started to feel like old songs played on broken radios. Promises made, not kept. Security offered, but only after the chaos arrived. With the rise of the AS alliance, the narrative has shifted. These are not nations waiting for permission. They are nations redefining what sovereignty means without asking for a blueprint from Washington. Some American analysts warn that if the U.S. doesn't engage with this new reality, it risks losing strategic ground not just to China or Russia, but to the growing voice of African self-determination. Others argue that this might be a necessary course correction. That perhaps the West's role now is to listen before it prescribes and respect before it intervenes. Meanwhile, European governments tread carefully. France, once dominant in the region, has seen its embassies protested and troops expelled. The EU offers development packages, but the street-level sentiment remains skeptical. Even the UN finds its influence diluted by the rise of localized governance and independent military coalitions like the AES. The world is watching. But more importantly, Africa is watching the world back. And for Americans who still believe in justice, transparency, and equal partnership, one question must now be asked out loud. Are we supporting African sovereignty or simply trying to manage it? The capture of Barhadine Mehdoune was not just an intelligence victory, it was a moral reckoning. It pulled back the curtain on a system that too many people had quietly accepted, where chaos in Africa could be managed, contained, or even leveraged as long as it served someone's interests. But the people of the Sahel are no longer waiting for saviors. They are not asking for charity. They are reclaiming their story, their land, and their power from warlords, yes, but also from those who wore suits and offered development while turning a blind eye to devastation. And this is where the warning lies for all of us. If we as Americans continue to measure foreign policy by control instead of collaboration, by influence instead of integrity, then we will not just lose allies. We will lose the moral compass we claim to uphold. President Ibrahim Traoré and the AES alliance are not perfect. No leader or nation is. But what they represent, a rising demand for dignity, security, and sovereignty, is not a threat to peace. It may be the very foundation of it. So now the question isn't whether Africa is ready to stand on its own. The question is, are we willing to stand beside them, or will we remain trapped in outdated assumptions? This story matters not just for Burkina Faso, Niger, or Mali. It matters for every citizen who has ever wondered whether the truth behind wars, diplomacy, and aid can finally be seen for what it is. Do you think President Ibrahim Traoré is leading Africa in the right direction, or is it too soon to tell? Please share this video if you believe it's time for a more honest conversation about global power and African freedom. Subscribe if you believe that the truth is more important than the headlines. And let us know in the comments, should America change its approach to African leadership or stay the course? History is shifting, and the people who notice early are often the ones who shape what comes next.